Holy cow, it is December already, and we are heading into the frantic, hectic holidays. This is Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. Thanks for joining me for the Psych Monologues. Psych Monologues is a podcast exploring the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. I might add that a large focus of the things that I have to say and the ideas that I get are inspired by and directed toward what many people are now referring to as the next generation. And I really specifically, it's probably more the 20-somethings that I have a deep concern for, and certainly a deep commitment to, in terms of what we're trying to do with the Psych Monologues and also what we're trying to do as a result of the silent retreats, which I will talk about a little later. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's talk about the issues that matter to you, where you live, what you think, how you feel about living life with others and Jesus, because after all, that is the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. So thanks for joining me. I am recording this on a Sunday afternoon. You will hear it on Monday. And what I wanted to bring you up to speed with, and if I had the sound effects, I probably would use them at this point, and that is, drum roll, please. We have reached another milestone in the life of this podcast. We have gone over 4,000 downloads within the last month, which is an absolute amazing, remarkable, mind-blowing statistic to me, at least, that we're doing something like that. So we're heading into a couple other episodes that I am excited about, but I'm also driven by, I think would be the safest way to put it. And let me put this question to you first and foremost. And usually when I ask a question like this, most people answer it in the abstract. Even in the hypothetical. And so it tends, the question itself tends to tempt us into instantaneously splitting our lives, and we talk about what we wish it were, and then we go back to living it the way it is. And that's ultimately the problem, because we live, some people would say duplicitous lives. I could say compartmentalized lives. We could talk about the stained glass life. We could talk about it in a lot of different ways, but essentially we talk one way and live another, which ultimately we would say is hypocritical, living behind the mask. But be that as it may, we are so accustomed to living that way that if somebody asks the kind of question I'm about to ask, we would answer it in the hypothetical, really. I mean, we would answer it the way we think most people should answer it. Now, you're saying, all right, get to the point. What's the frickin' question? The question is this: do you believe that you deserve good? I'll let that settle in for a second, because instinctively, I think most people would probably say, yeah, I think so. I'm a pretty good person. I deserve to have good things. And we seem to be on a tremendous mission to prove that we deserve good by the things that we accumulate and the money that we spend on all manner of things, which this season is perfect for, right? So do you believe you deserve good? Because we've been taught, at least in the Christian faith, that we deserve nothing. But through Jesus, we've been given everything. But ultimately, because it's Jesus that has given us everything, we're still left with deserving nothing good. And we live that way. Quite honestly, you look closely at it, and when good comes our way, we might embrace it. We might say, cool, this is great. I love it. Give me more. Or we might say, I don't deserve it. Which, by definition, whenever I invoke the word deserve, I am implying that the trade is uneven, that what I've been given outweighs or outdistances what I have given. So in a lot of cases, and I've had this conversation with a lot of young people specifically. I haven't talked about this as much amongst older folks, beyond the 20s and 30s even. But we've gotten this notion that if I say I deserve good, I'm being self-aggrandizing, I'm being selfish, because we tend to think in all or nothing terms. Better yet, you might call it dichotomous terms, or another way to think of it is in zero-sum terms. So if I get something that you don't, then that's the end of it, and you're in deficit, and I am in the condition of getting it. So the life where we live and the way that we experience it in our relationships, in the workplace, in other arenas, you name the arena, we've come to the conclusion oftentimes that we are really too far gone to deserve anything good. And that may be a string of bad relationships, that may be not being able to hold a job down, that may be not getting the job we wanted, or being passed over for a promotion, or not being noticed, or not anything else. So in order to live with the reality of that, of things not going the way we had anticipated, better yet, the way we have actually probably demanded or expected, then the only way to fill that in is with some kind of conclusion that answers or explains that. Because, now let me take a quick aside. Why is explanation such a big deal? Because if I can explain it, I can predict it, and if I can predict it, I can avoid it, and if I can avoid it, I will get what I want. So when things don't go according to plan, and things don't go according to the way we think they should go, we have to find some way to explain it. And either we live in a broken world with broken people, period, but that's an unsatisfactory answer. It's a lot easier to point the gun at ourselves and say, it's because I'm a failure. It's because I'll never accomplish anything good. It's because I will never be good enough. See my last podcast in terms of talking about enough. So the core issue of what I want to talk about starts with answering that core question. Do you believe that you deserve good? And maybe I can get rid of the word deserve even. I mean, do you believe that you can enjoy good would be probably another way. So the key thing that I want to talk about throughout the rest of this time is something that I refer to as sabotage. Now, interestingly enough, the word sabotage, I did a little word study. I'm kind of a word nerd, so this is a good hour of wasted time looking for it. But what happens is, well, let me back up. What does sabotage actually mean? And the interesting thing about it is sabotage literally means to botch things. You know, to botch things up so they can't work anymore. Now, usually for most of us, it usually it's thought of as something that happens without the awareness of the enemy, whoever that enemy may be. And you can watch, a variety of action flicks where the band of rebels infiltrate, particularly in Star Wars, infiltrate the evil empire, and they plant charges all around and blow up, whatever the particular beam is that they're worried about. And that's the way that we think about sabotage. But the question is, why do I keep sabotaging the good in my life? Why is it that it seems like every time that I have something good, something bad happens as a result? And sometimes we get to the point where Brene Brown has called it impending joy, because we experience some happiness, we experience joy, and we get this sense of foreboding that the other shoe is going to drop. And ultimately, I would rather beat myself over the head with the shoe than to have the shoe drop on my head. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about today in terms of self-sabotage. Now, I know I did an episode, I just realized this a few months ago about this within the spiritual journey. But the core issue isn't what I do. We tend to pay attention to the things that we do that undermine my best efforts to accomplish that which I am sure, I say I'm sure I need to do. And so we sabotage, and the saboteur, it's an inside job. It is literally me sabotaging myself. And why? And I think the why part of it is the question I asked earlier about good. Is I can't count anymore the number of times on my that I have warned people that I either talked to in counseling or students I've talked to or whatever, that because of the experiences that they have experienced, that's kind of redundant, the experiences they've had throughout their lives, they have come to the conclusion that the reason all that happens is because it's them. And so when it happens again, or better yet, when something good actually happens that doesn't match the frame, the conclusions that they've already made about themselves, then reflexively they end up doing things that sabotage the good in their lives. Now, how can we do that? Let me just give you some examples. Particularly in relationships, and we you may find yourself in a relationship with somebody who is really good. They're kind, they are considerate, they are sensitive, they are self-giving and self-sacrificing. They are all of those things that we say we would love to have within a relationship, obviously all within the bounds of having good boundaries, of allowing us to take responsibility for ourselves, and they take responsibility for themselves. So, but how do we sabotage the good in our lives? And one of the first things that we do is we create a crisis. Now, the one observation I will make to you is that stability and safety and security, in spite of the fact that we all want this so very bad, is boring. It's just downright boring. It seems as if something bad is going to happen. And so if you've ever heard the phrase, the lull before the storm, or being in the eye of the storm, where it's all quiet and then the storm is going to hit us. And oftentimes, what we come to and what we decide on is that really the only way to manage the impending crisis, because it's too uncomfortable to have it out there and wait for it to hit us, the best way to handle that ourselves is to make it happen on our terms. And so we create a crisis. And what ends up happening over time is we live in the relationship, we live from crisis to crisis. And there are periods of quiet in between, but the crisis amps us up. It's quote unquote exciting. Now you'd say, well, that kind of excitement is not the kind of excitement I really bargain on or I like. No, but it's known. It's predictable because I'm doing it. And so inadvertently, we create a crisis in the relationship, and oftentimes we find out just how persistent or tenacious or committed the other person is. And inadvertently, and the key word here is inadvertently, we inadvertently set to testing the person who's good to see if they're really good when they deal with us in this crisis. And sometimes the crisis is just being known. I mean, go back to a few episodes ago when I was talking about the fear of being known. See, that can be a crisis too. And it, again, it's something Brene Brown refers to it as a vulnerability hangover. Is that I take a risk, I open up to somebody, I tell them the real of what's going on, and then I kind of pull myself back in and brace for impact, and nothing happens. But I have this terrible feeling like I never should have said that. That was really, really dumb. They're going to think I'm dumb, or I'm so broken, or I'm so jacked up that they can't possibly be in relationship with me. And see, that's the narrative that feeds the crisis. So we can create a crisis. We can also catastrophize. There was a theorist in psychology who was named on the list of the 100 most influential psychologists in the first 100 years of psychology. And psychology, big P psychology, the psychology that we teach and everything else, hasn't been around really all that long as far as a science or as far as a discipline is concerned. It's only about 100 years and change. But during that 100 years, they identified some of the most influential people in psychology. And one of them was a guy by the name of Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis studied Greek philosophers, actually developed a strategy for helping people called rational emotive behavioral therapy, or RET or REBT. And he impacted and is a part of a bigger strategy of helping people, which you may or may not have had some interactions with, of somebody who does CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, that's the kissing cousin, pleasant, of course, pleasant in the terms of being kissing cousins. That's the kissing cousin of RET. Actually, it predates RET does, REBT predates CBT. But he came up with this term, this idea that we don't live through catastrophes. We actually catastrophize good things that happen to us. In other words, we turn it into a catastrophe. Why? Because we predict doom. See, we take whatever is happening, even disagreements or not seeing things the same way, or somebody doing something that really annoys us, and we catastrophize it. We push it into the future and say, if this continues at this rate with no change whatsoever, it will be a catastrophe. Now, we won't say those things, because there's a lot about us that is really pretty superstitious. It's like, I don't want to name it a catastrophe, because if I call it a catastrophe, it will be. And it's like, Merry Christmas, it's too late. You've already done that. So we take the word catastrophe, or Ellis did, and he turned it into a verb in terms of catastrophizing. And so then we say, well, if this continues to happen, nothing good will happen. I will be miserable. Everything will go wrong. And either that person will break up with me, or I will break up with them. As a matter of fact, in order to prevent the future that I have now painted, I will make it happen now so that I don't have to go through it then. Forget about the fact that I'm going through it right now. So catastrophizing. A third one that I think we have to talk about is simply withdrawal. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the physical withdrawal. We can withdraw from somebody emotionally when we start to predict that this good can't possibly keep going, and so sooner or later, like I said before, the shoe's going to drop, and if that's going to be the case, then I'll just use the shoe on myself first. So I withdraw. I start to pull away my emotional resources from the relationship. I make less deposits into it. I continue to kind of stand back and watch what happens and evaluate it that way. And the unfortunate part about that is that the other person oftentimes will sense that withdrawal, and then they will come toward us. And when they come toward us, we're saying, well, hey, look, I must be important enough, compelling enough for the person to come toward me. But then I'll get more afraid, because the further in we go, the more intimate we are known. And the more we're known, the more we're sure they'll find out how much of a fraud we are. So we start drawing away, and they continue to pursue us. And before too long, they get tired and they stop. And we say, oh, crap, I did too much. And now what happens is I end up pursuing them. And they say, I invested all of this stuff and never got any reciprocation in it. So I'm going to start moving away. And now suddenly we're pursuing and they're withdrawing. The key thing to keep in mind about withdrawal is, and that's true for all of these things that I just finished talking about, is they're all strategies to control for a certain outcome that we have predicted will happen, which we don't know it will. Now, ironically, I've been around so many people over 40 years of talking to people who say, well, I can't predict the future or anything, but then they go on and act as if they can, and that it is 100% accurate, and they build their present around the 100% accurate prediction of the future. And ultimately, the worst thing and the most predictable thing is that the person in question that I'm talking about here ends up alone, which is the very thing that they're trying to avoid, right? So withdrawal is a safe strategy, but I still am controlling the outcome of this. And the other one that is right neck and neck with withdrawal is just picking a fight. And that we can get overly critical of the other person. We can interpret their behavior as malicious in some way. And so when they say something, we might say, well, what do you mean by that? And the irony is we ask a question, what do you mean by that, when I've already decided what they mean by that. And, by the way, my way of thinking about what they mean by that is more true than theirs. That I know better about what they're thinking than they do. Again, ironies keep building up all over this, right? Because the only thing I do know probably is what I think about it, not what they think about it. And when it comes right down to it, what drives along our self-sabotage is overwhelming fear that if I invest and embrace the goodness that is offered me, it will be taken away. I will be abandoned. And I experience abandonment different if I do it than if somebody else does it to me. So the last one I'd mention in terms of how we go about sabotaging things is we globalize one event into everything. So we all know, right, that we're in a relationship with humans, and they're broken and they have difficulties and their struggles and so forth. And eventually, sooner or later, they're going to stumble. They're going to do something stupid or say something stupid or whatever. But then what we do is we take that and then we globalize it out to the entire relationship or define the person by that one event. Now, I am not even remotely in the same ballpark with taking the whole of what somebody does and making some conclusions about that. Because that would be appropriate evaluation. In Scripture, we'd call it discernment of somebody's character. And I'm called to do that. It's not that I'm allowed to do that. I'm called to do that because I am the protector and the caregiver and keeper of my own heart. So those are just a few of the things that we can do around sabotage and self-sabotage. And needless to say, it has a direct impact. Now, let me back up for just a second and connect one other dot. If I believe that I really don't deserve good, then how do I deal with God? Because we all know God is good, right? Although a lot of people make a different conclusion about God's goodness. Because his goodness is judged by the impact on them, rather than his enduring, eternal goodness that is a part of his own definition of himself. But be that as it may, when good things come from God, and I believe that I don't entirely deserve good things, then how in the world do I accept what I'm being given? You know, the ultimate gift, now that we're in Advent and we're leading up to Christmas, the ultimate gift we have been given as Christ followers is grace. And yet we still want to prove that we're worthy of it. So it's another dot to just put in there for your consideration and thought. The where we can land, and I'm sure the question is okay, all right, you've got my attention. I've done at least one or two of those things, maybe all of them. So what do I do about sabotage? Well, I think we have to answer the question, why is the sabotage there in the first place? It's protecting us from good. So if I'm protecting myself from good, then how do I dismantle this strategy that I have in terms of goodness in a relationship, in goodness in a variety of ways, and ultimately, usually, where have we learned this stuff? And we have learned this stuff in relationship, which means that the path in was relationship and the path out is relationship, which inevitably leads me into the very things that drive along my efforts to sabotage, and that is control and trust. Because if I go into a relationship and I invite somebody to know me as I am, not as I should be, and I invite them into relationship with me, I have an opportunity, if this is a relationship built on grace, I have the opportunity to learn a different way of behaving. So what can we do about sabotage? I would say it's a little bit like selling a house. You know, they say, what are the top 3 qualities of real estate? Location, location, location. What do we do about sabotage? Relationship, relationship, relationship. And while we give lip service to the need for relationship, we would rather trade a control-based, I wouldn't even call it a relationship, a control-based and contract-based association with another person than a trust-based and grace-driven relationship. Because that's the basis on which we begin to rewrite the script, if you will, around sabotage, or self-sabotage for that matter. Now, I still have to do something with my inherent assumptions or even implicit assumptions about my deserving good. And I'm going to have to grapple with that somehow. Usually I have to have a conversation that keeps it in front of me with somebody that is trusted and has earned my trust. I have to have it out in front, because if I don't keep that in my rangefinder, I will fall back into that strategy over and over and over again. And you see it time and time again. I've seen it in jobs where somebody has gotten all of the perks and the benefits of their skill set and being skilled and accolades and applause and everything else. And it seems like sooner or later there's something that pulls the rug out from under them. And when you trace back the roots of that, what you find is a assumption that they have about whether or not they deserve something that good somewhere. So the second thing is a little bit harder, very doable, but not something we do much of, and it's something that I would call becoming a student of yourself, studying your own ways. I mean, this comes in the form of journaling. Counseling offers you a place to be able to talk a little bit about the landscape of your own heart and what you tend to do in relationships and all that sort of stuff, because awareness leads to identification, and identification leads to or even calls us to a decision to act and do something differently. And if I take the risk under the conditions of grace to try something different, I'm probably something's going to change. Probably. So, relationship, becoming a student of yourself, and finally, the last one I would mention is how do we deal with sabotage or self-sabotage? Is we pursue and invite feedback. There's an interesting question that I've come across in my travels and in reading and in talking to people. It's two different questions. What do I do that draws you to me? And what do I do that pushes you away? Now, this is a really tough one. Getting feedback from people is tough because if they're the trustworthy, safe people in our lives, they will tell us the truth because they value the truth, because they know that also my ability to change is it has to be built on truth, not on falsity or platitudes or telling me what I want to hear or flattery or anything like that. But I have to pursue feedback. How do I come across? What am I missing here? What do you see that I'm doing that gets in the way of our relationship? See, those kinds of requests for information is really tough. I think for the person being asked that, it's really tough because we also have developed a culture in a lot of our relationships that I'll help you be comfortable and feel good about yourself if you will do the same. And the one thing that we have not distinguished that John Townsend and Henry Cloud talk about in the Boundaries book is there's a difference between hurting somebody and harming them. If I make a character assassination of the person and the personhood of that person, that is harming them. On the other hand, if I give them feedback, truthful feedback that draws them to do things differently, does it hurt? Yes. If I go into the dentist and I have a cavity, it's going to hurt. But on the backside of it, I will be better off. I will be intact. I will grow. I will learn how to floss my teeth or brush my teeth or whatever. And see, feedback is a key point, and there's a lot of people that I come into contact with, and I see myself cycling through it as well, where we live in a feedback vacuum, and we construct a world without any feedback, which ultimately is going to get flatter and flatter. It's not going to have depth because we're not getting any outside input. Now, and let me finish with a fairly gross example of this. Imagine for a moment you're standing at a water fountain, and you're next in line, and as you're noticing the water fountain, you notice something kind of strange about it because the drain doesn't go away. It gets filtered into a pump that then comes out the other side where the water is then being drunk. Now imagine it for a moment. There's no fresh water input to this thing. And ultimately, I think we all know intuitively that the water will get more and more toxic. We call it backwash with kids. Yeah, they say they want to drink of something of yours, and you let them drink it, and you get half of their meal back into whatever it is you're drinking, right? That's the picture. And that's what a life without feedback looks like. It gets more and more toxic. So self-sabotage and sabotage is not just about what I tend to do to undermine the good in my life. I better do something with the beliefs about whether I even deserve good or not. Because if I don't address that and how I frame the world around me in terms of the goodness that comes my way or the good people that I have in my life, I will keep doing this pattern over and over again. And I see it across the board. Like I said, I've been doing this counseling gig for 40 some odd years. I have seen this over and over and over again. And when you superimpose it, it also plays out in our spiritual journey as well. whether that's in the church or whether that's in our relationship with God or whether it's, in relationships with other Christ followers. So something to consider. So in terms of the end of program, just a few reminders as I close this out. If you have questions, if I've said something that triggers a thought in your head, please feel free to DM your questions to me on Instagram. We can be found at the Psych Monologues on Instagram, or you can hit the website and subscribe there. There's a keep in touch button at the very bottom of the front page of the web page. It is drmitch.com, and so you can follow us there, and then also you can provide comments and things and questions there as well. We can also be found I can be found at Facebook at ray.mitch, M-I-T-S-C-H, and LinkedIn drmitch. And the podcast itself can be found on any platform that you listen to podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Stitcher or iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, any of those places. The last thing is that if you're interested in partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund for the CCU Silent Retreats, you can do so by donating, and your donation is a tax-deductible gift. It goes through our fiscal sponsor, 1615 TV. So if you would like to donate if you go to the CCU drop down on the website, go to CCU Silent Retreats, and at the very bottom there's a button that says Donate. Now you can do that, and you will get a tax-deductible gift out of it. We're coming up on the end of the year. You're looking for charities to be able to give that would impact the next generation. Please give us a consideration. If you'd rather do that through check than through the online process or whatever, you can do that by making your checks out to 1615 TV. Yeah, it's 1615.tv. And then on your envelope, make it out to 1615 TV. P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado, 80104. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure taking some time to look at this intersection of psychology and faith and spiritual formation and continuing the journey of understanding and, like I said earlier, becoming a student of ourselves so that we can grasp and the grace and the goodness that is offered us on a day in and day out basis. So have a good one. This is Dr. Ray Mitsch signing off. Love ya. Later.